Trying to study anything with ADHD can be frustrating. I have some tips for you, and I'm about to go over 13 of them. When I study, the thing that really frustrates me is the fact I'll come across a word and I just don't know what the word is, and I'll keep reading and get to that word again, or get to a part that actually needs me to know that word to understand the rest of it. And what happens is then I don't understand the thing I just read. So I end up having to go back and try to figure out what that word is. So what I mean is when you are reading along and you come to a word you don't understand, go ahead and look up that word, get the dictionary out, look it up on Google, whatever, and then make sure you understand the meaning of that word. And you make sure you understand the meaning of how it's used in the sentence, because that way, when you come across that word again, you will understand it. Now, if you go through and read through something and you don't understand a word of it, then what happens, or what could happen is that you don't get the whole meaning of whatever you're reading. And it's going to be much harder for you to remember things as you're going through and reading it, because in the back of your mind and your brain's like, you don't understand that word. So how am I going to understand the context and everything else that you're reading when you don't understand that word there? And so what you want to do, what's going to help you to remember, is if you know every word that you read, if you know the meaning of every word that you read, then you'll be able to comprehend it better, and your brain will help you to remember that word better. And with ADHD, it's very good to have anything that we can use as an aid to make sure that we can remember things better. So this is an easy little tip for you to do when you start studying things. Now, here's something else that's really interesting. Even if you know all the words you're reading, you're still going to have to reread things a number of times with ADHD, because you're dealing with a working memory deficit. And so what happens is you're taking in all this information, you're trying to remember everything, and your brain just runs out of space basically in the fact of taking in things, right? And so now you have to figure out what you're going to do, because you can't take in any more information at the time. You'll be reading along and you're just not getting it. You're just like, I don't understand why I'm not getting this. I've reread it like 4 or 5 times, and you're still just like, what's going on? So what I would suggest to you is to make sure that you write things down somewhere to get that information onto a piece of paper or just somewhere else, so you can start taking in more information. And the fact is, even with doing all this, you're still going to have to go back and read things a number of times and make sure that you understand them, to make sure that you understand how everything comes together in the context of them. And it may take you multiple times, 4 or 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, whatever it takes you to understand that phrase or that passage or that page or whatever chapter that you're going through. And even when you get to the test, you're going to have to read things on your test multiple times as well, just to make sure you're understanding what the test question is asking for. And by the way, do not forget to take your breaks. You're going to need them with ADHD. There is going to come a point to where you're looking at the page and you are just like, I just don't understand anything at all in the page right now. And that's just because you have gotten to the point to where your brain's like, hey, I need a break. Let me go get refreshed somehow, some way. So study about 15 minutes and take a break, and then another 15 minutes, take a break, then another 15 minutes, take a break. And then at the point to where you're on your fourth break, take a good half hour to just refresh yourself so that you can come through and come back and then look at the information again on a fresh perspective. And a lot of times that does help, because of the fact that you might not be able to think of what the solution is right then, because you've just been looking at it for so long. When you come back and look at it again, then you may have the solution right there, then and ready, and you'll be able to move on to whatever the next thing you need to move on to. But breaks are very essential when you're studying, because you do not want to try to cram all night or go through in the study for hours and hours and then get to the point to where you think about that all the stuff that you might have learned or should have learned, and you just don't remember anything at the point. And so you want to make sure that you do have a break that's going to help get you refreshed, so that you can remember as much information as possible and you can understand as much information as possible. And now, one of the best things that helped me study are flashcards. And I used to have to write them out on a little flashcard, 3x5 card, and go through and write all the information down there, and then write the other information, the answer on the back, and then go through, look at the front, and then try to guess what's on the back. That's how I studied. That was a long time ago, where they did not have even the internet, or they didn't have these cool programs like Quizlet that you can use online now, and that's much better. But I would say go back and do it old school and use an actual flashcard and write everything down, because when you are writing something and you're physically going through the actual motion of writing something, then it's going to be much easier for you to remember as you're writing it out. And the more times you write something out, then the more times you're going to remember it. And then if you like mess up on the flashcard to write it again, then that's going to make it so that you have to try to remember that thing again. And as you go through all those different motions to remember all those things and go through all the motions, turn that flashcard over and then look at the answer, all that is going to be something that you will remember during the test basically. Because what happens is you're trying to think of that thing and you say, "Oh yeah, I did it on this flashcard." And then you think about you writing on the flashcard and write the answer out, writing the question out, and then flipping that thing over, and all that will come to your brain and you'll be like, "Oh yeah, the answer is this because I remember at the time I was doing this, heard a noise doing that, funny smell or whatever in the dorm or whatever." And you'll remember all those things about the environment that you were doing as you were writing something down. And it's going to make it a lot easier for you to remember, as opposed to if you're on a computer going through Quizlet or whatever, then you may not remember it, may not retain it as much because you are just looking at it and try to retain it. And here's something else that's really cool that will help you to remember: study in an environment similar to what you're going to take the test in. So if you're going to take a test in a really quiet room, in a chair, in a desk, and everything like that, then you want to make sure that you study in a similar way where your room's kind of quiet, really quiet, and then you're at a chair and a desk. That's going to help you to remember, because as you're taking the test and you're going through and writing everything down or going through and answering your multiple choice questions, then you're going to be able to think back, okay, I was in my chair at my desk and I remember going back to that question and I didn't really know what the answer was. I went and I looked it up and I found it here. Oh yeah, I remember that. And then you finally remember what the answer is. It's just going to help you be in that kind of same environment that's going to help you to attach different kinds of things, different kinds of actions, different kinds of things in your environment to those things. And you can use those to actually remember what you were doing at that time, or how you were feeling at that time, or when you saw that answer, how you felt, or when you saw that answer, how you like, oh, I should have known that one, right? So all of that kind of stuff is going to help you to remember, and you do it as you're in an environment that's similar to the one you're testing in, because you're going to be able to relate back to a similar situation. And that's going to help you to remember things a lot easier and a lot better. And here's something else that helped me a ton. When I was studying, the best thing was to have a study group or an accountability group. And I used to have to go in person, not like it is now where you can just communicate online. Remember, I didn't even have internet when I went to college the first time. We had to meet up somewhere and then all of us together go back and forth, answering questions, giving information, going over things, reading things, looking at different test questions, looking at different quizzes, going over that. So all of that was done in a group face to face where everybody was included. And it might be just 2 people, it might be 4 people, it might be 10 people, depending on who all wanted to come. And of course, it was like at a start time where people would show up and then we'd be there for like 2 or 3 hours or whatever. And it was really cool because you also like being at a place where you have, coffee or drinks or whatever, and sit down and do it that way as well. But it was really just a nice atmosphere. Now, the thing about this is that you can also associate things back to that study group. You'll be in a test and you'll think back, oh yeah, Rebecca said this, or Joe said this, and that's how I got the answer. You'll remember back to that interaction. You might even say, hey, I'm going to use Joe to remember this certain thing. And then you just associate with that name Joe, right? So the thing about it is, having a study group is really, really important and cool. And I would love them because of the fact that when I'm sitting there trying to figure out something, then I could bounce it off someone else and say, hey, how do you figure this out? Do you understand this? And how does this work or that work? And I could still contribute as well of the things that I knew as well. And that was really cool because we all together could go through and try to understand the information together. And then everybody is more prepared for the test and it helps everybody out. But it's one of the best ways because you're going to hear the information multiple times so that you can remember things better, right? And the thing with ADHD, repetition is a really good thing, because hearing something over and over and over again, you start to remember things, you start to get it, you start to understand it better, and you start to really internalize it. And that's going to help you on the test. And here's something else you should definitely do. Associate things you're studying with something else. For example, you're studying along and you have to remember this certain thing. And so you associate it with a teddy bear, right? And so I don't know why I thought of teddy bears. That's the first thing that came to mind. But you're thinking about something in nature and you're like, hey, I need to remember this for my science class. And then you associate that with a teddy bear. And so as you're going through on the test, then you're going to remember, oh yeah, that's that thing in nature, and I associate it with a teddy bear, and then you remember that thing It absolutely works because I've used this to pass a lot of tests. And the thing about it is, you can associate it with anything. I know when I was taking a test, I had to go through the circulatory system of the heart and figure out how blood flowed. I drew a little car with like a not a super, not a super really good car, right? My drawing skills are not that, but I drew it. And then every time that I would think about the way that blood flowed, I would be able to think back and say, oh, yeah, I drew that car. It flowed this way or it moved this way to the left. So I know the blood goes that way and it moved this way to the right in this instance. So I know it goes that way and I can figure it out and I can think back to it. And that would always be my mind to make sure that I knew what information was associated with the car and how I could bring it back to me and remember it on the test. And so this is a great way to do things. And you can use anything that's going to help you to remember whatever you want to associate it with. It is up to you. Whatever is like something you can kind of hold on to and make sure that you remember, that's fine. And the thing about it is, if you need to write it down, because I've done this too, you write down things as you're writing it down on your paper. Then you write down you put like a symbol there of something that you want to associate it with. And then when you go back and go to study, then you go back through and you're like, oh yeah, this means this means that, this means this. And when you get on a test, and what you can do is you can think back to that symbol, and that symbol will actually help you to recall that information. Hey, I need to make sure that I remember this thing about science or whatever. I need to make sure I remember this history question. I remember I associated with this person, this place, this thing. I think back, okay, I remember that thing, and now I can remember the actual answer to the test question, and then it will help me to pass my test, as it's going to help me to jog my memory to actually bring that information forward so that I can use it to give the answer. And here's something else that is an absolute must for me. I need to have music on in the background somewhere just to have it so it's a relaxing environment, or even a song that's really motivating for me, or maybe even just white noise in the background. Whatever is a good motivator for you, whatever sounds that you like to listen to help you relax and get in the mood to actually study. You can even have like a noise machine, get like crashing waves if you want to do that. That's going to help you to just relax your mind and everything as you're going through and trying to remember all the information. So it is a good thing if that is a thing that you are sure that you are not gonna just concentrate on the music and the words and everything that's going on instead of actually studying. So you might want to get music that's really instrumental so that you're not concentrating on the words as you're trying to study, because it is kind of hard to listen to the words of a song and then also try to listen to your information as you're speaking it out or going through and reading something and then hearing the words in the song that you're trying to have as motivation and relaxation. That can be a little bit confusing. So I would say get instrumental music as well if you're going to do that. And then it's just low in the background so that you can hear it and so that your environment is just not pure silence as you're going through and studying, because pure silence a lot of times can just be not the most comfortable things because you are generally accustomed to hearing something, right? Hearing something else in the room. If you're in a really quiet area, like in a library or something, it just feels kind of weird, right? Because you want to hear something. And so this is going to help you give something to your environment that will help you be able to have just something to listen to that is going to help you to actually be more comfortable as you're studying. And here's something to never do. Do not study when you are tired, because you're just going to be reading something, read some information, trying to remember things, and you're just going to be like sleepy, or you're going to be trying to write something. You'll write all across the page and it won't make any sense. And then you'll write off the page. How you have your pen, you start writing off the page because you just fell asleep as you're trying to do something. So don't do it. Just don't study when you're super tired, because of the fact that you're not going to be able to remember or retain information as well when you're tired. And you're just going to get to the point to where you're like, you may just fall asleep, and then you're going to be studying, trying to remember everything for your test, and you won't remember because you actually fell asleep. Or you'll just realize that you have just wasted a lot of time because you were going to study at this time and you fell asleep, and now you don't have the time that you needed to actually study, as opposed to just like taking a nap or something, or just taking time to get a little bit of a break so that you're not super tired. It's good to have a power nap sometimes just to refresh you, okay? So that's okay to do, but do not study when you're really tired, because it's going to be much harder for you to remember things, much harder for you to comprehend things and retain things. And you want to be at your best when you are actually going through and actually trying to study for tests and everything. I know sometimes, it might be you're really up late, at night, and the test might be like early in the morning, and you're trying to get through everything so you can remember everything so you can get ready for the test in the morning. Uh, you know, I've done that. It doesn't really work that well. I've done the whole cram thing right before the test, the night before, stay up till like 4 o'clock in the morning to go in and take the test at 8 o'clock. It's a really tough day when you do that. So make sure if you have to take a power nap, whatever you have to do, just don't study when you're super tired. You're going to get a lot more out of your study time if you are actually rested, or at least kind of rested as you're going through and trying to study things. Now, here's another cool memory trick that you can use when studying, and it's called chunking. Now, what this is you take similar things together and you put them in one chunk of information, and you put them together as, hey, I'm going to remember all the things for the heart, or all the things for the muscles, or all the things for bears or porcupines or whatever it is, right? So you put those in a category, and as you're putting them in a category, you break it down into smaller chunks so that you can remember it, so that it makes sense to you. Because what's going to happen is you're going to be able to remember those things and those chunks because they're going to be associated with each other. So if you have something like, hey, I'm going to learn this recipe for cooking, right? And you say this recipe has so many different things in it, but I know it has these different sugars in it, and I know that these need to go in this category, and I can remember those things in the sugar category. I also know that it has all these different bacon things in it that I need to do for the bacon ingredients. So then you start putting those ingredients in the different categories. As you're doing this, you're creating these different little categories, different little chunks, and so you actually associate those things together. So when you're trying to remember those things, then you're able to recall the first thing and recall the second thing, recall the third thing. It's going to make a lot more sense to you. Now, I use cooking as an example, but you can use this for anything. But it's really good when you're studying, because a lot of times you're trying to figure out ways, okay, how am I going to remember this thing I need to remember on the test? And you got like chapters to go through, multiple chapters and multiple questions and multiple review questions. You're trying to figure out ways to actually remember that stuff easier and better. And this is a great method to do that, because now you're breaking it down so that you aren't trying to remember as much information all at once with everything else. Because you're doing that, it's going to be much harder to say, hey, I want to remember all this information, everything else at once. And that's going to be a lot of information that is just not going to have any kind of like things together, right? You're trying to remember this from this chapter, that from this chapter, this from this chapter, and it's not all making sense. As opposed to if you go through and try to find the things that are like and put them in the different categories, different chunks, then you can go through and remember those things a lot easier, and that's going to help you when you get to the test. Now, if you ever heard someone say location, 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 and that's because location matters when you're trying to study. Study in the best place for you, whatever is going to make you comfortable, whether it's in your room, dorm room, coffee shop. You like to go to coffee shop and study there, then study there. But then again, that also means that you're not studying in an environment where you're going to actually take a test similar to where you're going to take the test. So just realize that as you do that. But if that is what you need, if you have to go to a coffee shop, you want to have your coffee and relax and be around other people, and that makes you happy and that helps you to study, then go ahead and go for it. Whatever you want to use in your environment that's going to help you retain the information, that's going to help you get comfortable, that's going to help you to stay motivated and on task and focus and everything, then go ahead and go to that environment and study there. You know, that is the best thing, because you want to make sure that you're in the best place for you to retain that information, for you to study, for you to be ready for your test. And that's going to make a difference. Something just as small as where you study can be very powerful when you're trying to remember that information. And here's something you really need to do as you're studying that's simple, but is really a good thing. Silence your cell phone and also stay off social media, because going to be a big distraction. Now, you can still see who's calling on your cell phone if you have it next to you. You just don't want to ring, right? So, and the other thing is you don't want to keep just getting notification after notification, then getting on whatever social media platform is and going down the ADHD rabbit hole by looking at one thing, and that sparks you looking at another thing, and that sparks you look at another thing. And then before you know it, all your study time is gone. So just make sure that you do these little itty bitty things that are going to pay a lot of dividends for you, because you want to be able to make sure that you get your study time in instead of being on your phone and looking up things that are not important at the time, and then not getting the studying done that you actually need to get done. And here's something else that you need to do. You need to review a lot when you have ADHD, because you need to hear the information again and again and again. You need to go through it multiple times, especially when you have to take breaks and then come back to it and then look at it another day, because you may not have gotten it all in one sitting. And the thing about it is, you need as much practice as you can to make sure you understand everything, especially when you're going to take a test that might be multiple choice, and the answers and the question may not be in the way that you take in that information, because neurodivergent neurodivergent thinking, and the question may be asked in a certain way, and now you have to go through and try to decipher it and break it down, and then break it down and look at the answer. Because a lot of times we take those multiple choice questions, multiple choice tests, the question and the answers are just phrased in a way that are just like, is this the answer? Is that the answer? They're just phrased in a way that sometimes don't make sense till you really review it and really go through it and try to figure out what the deal is. So you need to review a lot so that when you go through that process, you can really just bring up that information and remember it. Now, when you are taking the test, of course, you can ask for accommodations where you get some extra time to finish the test. So that's always good. But even with that extra time, you're going to need to be able to look at the question, figure it out, and then also recall that information. And that sometimes takes a little longer as well. So this is a great thing for you to do to make sure that all the things that you've done so far have helped you to get to this point and pass your test. Now, if you want to learn how to write papers as well, I do have a video on that. I have a video on how to develop an outline to write your paper when you have ADHD. And you can watch that video right